Mindy Caliguire, and you are here for what we call the Backstage, which is a weekly webcast that is part of our Resilient Church Leadership Initiative, which has been gaining steam over the last number of weeks. We're really excited to walk with leaders in very authentic ways about the challenges to the leadership and how the work that we do on the backstage or the interior life really drives what we have to bring forward in the front stage. And as long as we keep the backstage driving what's happening on the front stage, things can go really well. And when the front stage starts to minimize the work that we could do in the backstage, things start to falter. And so we are here to help with that challenge that all of us feel. And my name is Mindy again, and I'm part of a strategy team that is coming together around resilient church leadership. And in addition to that, I lead an organization called Soul Care. It's all about helping leaders live and lead from a place of soul health. And I'm also involved in executive leadership here in GLUE. I'm in Boulder, Colorado right now, and but you can't see the mountains. This is a kind of a lame, quiet space for me to meet in. But we're joined today by two friends, Albert Tate and Dr. Eric Brown. And Eric serves with me on the strategy team for Resilient Church Leadership. He's a licensed professional counselor and a core faculty member at DePaul University in Chicago. And he's done significant research in the fields of trust and race and in psychology. So welcome, glad you're here. And Albert Tate is a friend. We serve together on a board for Stadia Church Planting, and he's very active in his own church, Fellowship Church in Monrovia, and which he co-founded, I think, with your wife about 8 or 9 years ago, which is awesome. And both of these guys have experience in leading intentionally leading multi-ethnic churches. And that is the topic we're working on today, is to understand what are some of the challenges to leadership in a multi-ethnic environment. How does that impact the interior world? How can we make good progress in that field? So that's our hope. Now we're going to be on Facebook, so go ahead and like and share so that maybe your friends and colleagues can be joining in on this conversation. We'd love to have you there. And we're also going to be taking live questions from Facebook. So if you have a question for either of our guests or something that's coming up for you during this webcast, we'd love to hear from you. We really want to build that kind of sense of interaction and community as we move forward. So I think I'll just start, Eric, with a question that you and I have interacted with a little bit about, but I'm very curious to know both your thoughts on this. But first to you, Eric, what do you find are some of the stressors or pressures that are unique to church leaders in a multi-ethnic church environment? And maybe if we could just start with a definition. I don't want to make any assumptions. When you think of a multi-ethnic church, what's your operating definition of that?
I'm glad you asked that question. You know, when I think of a multi-ethnic churches, I'm thinking about more than just visible diversity, okay? I think there are a lot of churches, and I'm not throwing shade on anyone right now, but there are a lot of churches that claim to be multi-ethnic. And, you know, if you go back when we were worshiping together in a building, if you walked in, you would see, different ethnicities there. But when I think about multi-ethnic churches, I'm thinking churches that are multi-ethnic from the top down. Okay, churches that are trying to shape their worship services, the way they do their meetings, the way they fellowship, just considering the different races and ethnic groups that they have.
That's great. And so what are some of the challenges that come to those who are leading those kinds of churches? What makes that hard? What makes it challenging?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that real brief because I want to hear Pastor Albert on
Yeah.
All right, so I have this picture right above my computer. Me, my dad, and my grandfather at my seminary graduation. Both my grandfather and my dad, they pastored Black churches, and that was tough enough, right? I mean, it's tough just being a pastor, period, being with people who kind of share your worldview. But I think right now in this historical moment, I think there are a lot of pastors, particularly multi-ethnic churches, that are trying to figure out how can they hold their church together. When I talk to, and I do some counseling with white pastors, a couple of whom are working with multi-ethnic churches. And what they tell me is that they're afraid, right? They're afraid that they're going to lose some of their big donors, and they still have $1.5 million, right, to pay off on their building, right? They're afraid of how they're going to be judged in this historical moment 20 years, from now, if they don't have courage. They're afraid that some of their parishioners of color are going to call them racist, all right? When I think about pastors of color, a number of my friends who are doing this, they're having to deal with their own racial trauma, right, in this moment, as they're watching some of these videos. And another thing pastors are really dealing with is that there were some people, I'm thinking about white pastors in predominantly white churches that had some diversity. There were people of color who were sitting in the pews maybe for years, who were willing to assimilate, and they really didn't create too much of a stir. But after COVID and the rampant anti-Asian racism, right, and then these these killings that went viral on the internet, there are a lot of people who are speaking out now, and pastors are struggling with this.
Yeah, I'm hearing that from my colleagues as well in churches around the country, particularly out on the West Coast. There's a church in the Bay Area that is really at risk. They had this beautiful community of great diversity, and even though everyone involved, I think, has the desire for all things to move forward with a kingdom focus, etc., there's just painful things that have happened that are making it difficult to move it forward. So I am hearing, I'm in touch with some of the leaders there. They're heartbroken. They're heartbroken trying to figure out how to hold this fragile community together in the midst of so much pain and suffering, and then to layer on the misses that are happening because of the divides across ethnic lines. So anyway, Albert, tell us how you think about how you define. Do you have any additional words you would say as a definition to a multi-ethnic church? And then what are the challenges that you find associated with that, with leading that?
Yeah, so number one, just so honored to be here with you, Mindy, one of the most brilliant minds of soul care of our generation. So to sit in this space I always walk away smarter and honestly challenged that I need to probably sleep more, pray more, and eat better. So your presence is convicting. Just the subject matter alone, soulcare.com alone. And Dr. Eric, your wisdom and your experience, man, I'm just honored to sit at the feet and just kind of listen and learn. But I will tell a little bit about my experiences. As I think about the definition, I think, Dr. Eric, you're so right. It's such a big deal. I think we give ourselves too much credit for seeing a couple of people that look differently in the pews, and we take a victory lap and think we've accomplished multi-ethnic church. And it is just the tip of the iceberg. And I hesitate to even give credit for it being a tip. Here's the thing. I think the technical definition, and Dr. Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I think the technical is 20%. 20% of your congregation is not one thing. At least no more than 20%. So you've got at least 20% diversity, I think, of people that aren't majority culture. That's technical. I think, like Dr. Eric mentioned, I think when you think multi-ethnic, you really got to think multicultural at the same time, recognizing that there are nuances and differences. You can have different ethnicities in the pews, but it still be overwhelmingly marked with white culture. Or multi-ethnicity in the pews, and it still be overwhelmingly marked with Black culture. So here are two leaders that I love and respect dearly. I mean, have shaped my life dearly. So this is no shade on them. Rick Warren would say he has a multi-ethnic church, and I would agree with him. But I would also say it's pretty monocultural. You have a pretty white cultural experience there, white Orange County cultural experience for his main campus there in Saddleback, which is amazing. It's one of the most beautiful facilities, most beautiful thing. But I don't nothing say Korean culture, don't nothing say Black culture, don't nothing say brown. It is white. You go to Bishop Jake's church, and you'll see some diversity in the pews there. But let me tell you something. That thing is unapologetically blackity black, black, African American, rich black. I know it because I go there often in my own virtually just to soak it in because I love it, right? I love it. It's amazing. So I just think it's important to recognize that just because you got different people in the pews doesn't mean you're experiencing a multi-ethnic, multicultural church. And while I think because we sometimes we get in trouble with this conversation because you say, what about the power of the Korean church? What about the impact of the Black church? I think all of those are necessary, have been necessary in our culture, and will be necessary. I think there is an abundance of representation of those, though. I think if we're going to talk about new churches in the church of where there's a deficit of spaces where we can come together, where people that don't look alike, don't live alike, and don't vote alike are worshiping together in one space, in one community, in one tribe. And I think that yields a different kind of fruit. You take Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, who lived in the same neighborhood. But George Zimmerman, when he saw Trayvon, saw fear and a threat. I'm convinced that if George and Trayvon's parents were in the same life group, doing life together, George wouldn't have seen Trayvon as a threat. He would have seen him as his neighbor, who he actually was. So the work of the multi-ethnic church is huge and absolutely necessary. We need people. So when I define it, I think if it's people that don't look alike, don't live alike, don't vote alike. People, and it's marked by intergenerational as well as multi-ethnicity, and us coming together and working through our differences, not acting like they don't exist, but acknowledging them on the table. But while that acknowledgement is there, there's also a greater acknowledgement of the abundance of the glory of God and his ability to bring us all beyond our differences to a level of oneness that doesn't ignore our differences, but it's an acknowledge of them. Then it's a greater acknowledgement of one that's greater. And it is under his name that we gather and pursue his presence. So I think that Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, kind of, if you want a biblical reference, where we're seated around God's throne, he says, where we're standing around God's throne, every tribe, every nation, every tongue, every race, and with all of those differences that the author takes painstakingly effort to point out. He walks every tribe, nation, race, all those things are different, but we're all saying one thing: worthy is the Lamb that was slain. And my thing is, if we intend to stand around the throne, we should practice now by sitting around the table and experiencing life with people that are different. What makes it hard to lead a church like that lives that way? Oh, this is easy. What makes that hard? Donald Trump makes that hard. Nancy Pelosi makes that hard. Fox News makes that hard. CNN makes that hard. Everybody can relax. Y'all thought I was just about to say Donald Trump. Everybody take a breather. I know you just got triggered. Everybody take a breath. Everybody calm down. I think they all make it hard. Wearing a mask makes it hard. Anti-mask people make it hard. The world has found a way to divide us on every corner, in every way. So this is by far I told our staff at our church the other day, this is the hardest. We're working at the hardest place to work in the country right now. Trying to work at a multi-ethnic church right now, this is the hardest. You on the hardest staff in the country. Life Church, Craig Rochelle ain't got nothing with the burdens I'm carrying right now. Like, he ain't having to deal with, well, he probably is dealing with a lot of stuff, but I'm telling you, trying to get Republicans and Democrats and Fox Newsers and CNNers to come together and see how to open the church, close the church. What do we do? That's got political, so those are the things. Humanity makes it hard, right? Humanity makes it hard, but in many ways, that's nothing new. Humanity is what's always made it hard. But it's our ability to be a witness to the world, because the world is desperate for a witness to say, how do we come together? And I think the church should be that witness to say, here is the way that we come together. We all sit at a table together. Here's the key: the table is stained with blood. And that's how we come together, by a blood-stained table.
Amen. Amen. Hey, interesting. People are already starting to engage with questions coming in from Facebook, and anybody watching.
They weren't. They are now. Once I said,
no, it didn't have to do with Trump. It probably happened before that.
They got some now.
No, actually, I think it's a really interesting question that Walker is raising, and he's introducing a new term. So he's saying, isn't what we're looking for a Christian culture in the midst of ethnic diversity? And as I read that question and think about it, my initial thought is, I think, sadly, if somebody had said before this conversation, Mindy, what do you think the Christian culture in the United States is right now? I don't think I would have a picture that is the bloodstained table that you just described. I think my perception of the Christian culture is sort of as it is surfacing in media outlets and other things like that. But if we ignore maybe how those divisive outlets want us to think about what Christian culture is and stick to maybe a true biblical sense of what Christian culture could or should mean, how do you think of Christian culture with ethnic diversity? How do those words come together for you?
So I'll jump on quick, and then I'll let the doctor give us a better answer. But I think, but you hit the nail on the head. How we see Christian culture, and it all depends on who's asking the question. If we see Christian culture as white upper middle class evangelicalism, then we've got a problem, because I don't see that. That culture is marked with bigotry, with a denial and an ignorance concerning race, with an unhealthy tie to the Republican Party, with an unhealthy tie to nationalism. So American Christianity, we really got to use a bunch of filters, a lot of clarifiers, in order to get on one accord. I think how I will respond to his thought is what we really want to try to build is a kingdom culture. And kingdom culture, the word kingdom pulls it out of this thing that America has done with Christianity and this nationalism. And it says, yeah, heaven's going to be every tongue, every race. Heaven ain't going to be America, and then we provide seats at the table for other folks. You know what I mean? And America ain't funding heaven. We're not bringing it, like, it's not so like the UN, like, we fund all of this stuff. Calm down. There's a sense of kingdom, that there's a king that we all bow down and we all serve to, and that's greater than all of us. And I think that's the culture that we want to create.
Yeah, Dr. and Eric? To be fair, I tossed in the sort of nationalism and the culture in our country. His question was really about Christian culture. I layered to where my head goes with that, but his question is probably more akin to what a kingdom culture would be. So I like bringing that in. Dr. Eric, what would you say? How do you think about those words?
And I agree with the pastor. And I don't know who the person is, and I'm sure, you mean well. Most of the time that I've heard, a search for a Christian culture, it is usually through the eyes of the ethnicity of whoever asked the question.
Oh, interesting.
Focusing on that. And I couldn't agree more. What we need to focus on is the kingdom, right? Discipleship in the kingdom. And we need to celebrate and listen very closely to the ethnicities that are around us.
Good.
Good.
So Albert, you've said it's been tricky. I don't know, Eric, if this has been tricky in your world as well, being particularly hard to lead in this moment in church environments. I know you're not senior pastoring now, but you have in the past. I'm wondering, I'm picturing, I know some of your staff, Albert, and I'm imagining a table. You guys sometimes Facebook Live or whatever, Instagram from your staff meetings and stuff. I feel like I have an idea in my head of what that could look like, at least when you're there in person, which I'm not sure you are right now. But when it gets hard, when an adversarial comment is said, when someone says something without really thinking what that could sound like to someone from who's a peer, who is sitting at that table soaked with blood, all that stuff, but something hard has been said or done. For you as a pastor and as a leader, what tools have you learned to pause your perhaps natural reaction to jump in or whatever, or maybe that is the thing you end up doing, but what reserves do you draw on in moments like that? And how do you equip yourself to lead well through those things that are inevitably going to happen? I would agree. You probably have the hardest, and any multi-ethnic pastor probably has one of the hardest jobs right now in the country. and an
Yeah.
important one.
Yeah. I think if we're not getting those emails or not getting those comments, we're probably not doing our job right. So the nature of what we do is to consistently create discomfort for those that find themselves on the extreme left or the extreme right. So we find ourselves consistently being critiqued that we're not something enough because we're not overly immersive in the cultural norms. We try to alleviate, we try to live above, we try to live outside, we try to create this 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 gospel centric middle that's marked with sacrifice, that's marked with stretching, that's marked with discomfort. So we are currently doing something that we call, so to give the answer to your question, then to throw out a couple of examples. Number one, we try to normalize the discomfort of the conversation.
Excellent.
Because I find that what causes most of us to not engage is the fear of discomfort or awkwardness. We live in a time and a generation where we treat awkwardness like the Spanish flu or something. Like awkwardness is terrible. So why didn't you say anything? Because I don't want to get awkward. Or why didn't you tell them the truth? I didn't want to be awkward. No one has ever died from being awkward. Well, how did they die? Oh man, dude, Saturday night it was crazy. It got awkward and he died. Like that's been said of no one ever. But if you think about it, there's this aversion to discomfort or awkwardness, or that unless you're in the comment section of Facebook, then you talk all big and bad and you say stuff that you would never say to people's face. I wish we could take everybody's comments and set up a lunch with the people they said it to and dare them to say it again. I got a couple of people that I love to dare to say it to my face, but that's a whole other thing. I'm working on that in therapy.
I was going to say, Eric will have a few comments for us in a minute.
That's a whole nother issue. We'll set up a session later. But what to help equip people with the awkwardness, we're doing something now that's really cool. I got an update yesterday. We have summer table talks about race, and we have tables, check this out, for white women, table for minorities to talk about, Dr. Eric, some of the trauma that we've experienced.
Okay.
We have mixed race tables where they're walking through books like White Fragility, or looking at, we got movies. We got a table for all white men, to talk about white privilege and what you want to talk about. Crazy. And we got over 500 people going through these tables, and they're walking through it, talking about trauma, talking about classroom to pipeline stuff. What we're trying to do is we're trying to normalize that conversation, because once we get over the discomfort and the awkwardness, we actually get to truth in hearing and listening and being less defensive. Yep. And actually understanding what we talk about. So we got table talk where we're talking about defunding the police. Oh, and my thing is, we've been defunding education for a really long time, and ain't nobody protested yet. So one word about defunding the police, we lose our minds. But we've been defunding schools and education publicly, very unapologetically, and ain't nobody said one protest. I ain't seen one meme yet. We talk about, why is that? Where is that coming from? Why are we so defensive about police, but not defensive about our teachers and our community, which has been parenthetically, then I'll get off this soapbox. As you can see, I got a lot of soapboxes. Which has parenthetically, check this out. The classroom, the prison pipeline is a real thing. They build prisons during the prison enterprise. They were building cells. They would know how large to build the prison based on, I believe, Dr. Eric, you can correct me, 5th grade reading levels.
Right. That's exactly.
Or the reading levels. And so you're defensive about police because of fear and criminalization, recognizing that the lack of education has a direct impact on criminalization. So if you really want to stop the crime, You don't need more police and more tanks and more grenades. We need more teachers. We need more investment in the classroom, more after school program, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, and I love police. I got family. It's more Black folks. I ain't against police at all. My uncles, cousins, we got so many police departments. We are so invested in the police department. So to think that that's a lack of high view on police is just not true. Blacks in America have been serving in the military and the police forces, and it has been a highly valued role and position in our families, in our churches, and our communities. We have always honored police and military. So don't discredit us just because we're willing to critique and want to engage in a conversation to say, how can we stop having police brutalize Black bodies to the degree that they are and still honor the police force in what they bring to the conversation. Now, Mindy, if you ain't got no questions in that question lineup now, they
well,
just.
I'm like, this is what we love though about this Resilient Church leadership vision, is we want to create a place where we're talking about not only the real challenges of leadership, especially in the moment we're in, but also getting into that, like, okay, and how do, like, my question to you, Dr. Eric, is this sort of normalizing hard conversations. Like, what's actually happening in the brain? How do we grow in that? Like, say there's somebody listening who's a pastor of a predominantly white church in rural America somewhere that, let's say, is possibly more Republican, but really kingdom focused. Really, their community loves Jesus. They don't have anyone of any other ethnicity that lives in a 200-mile zone, and they want to be relevant to this, but they're not used to talking about it. What are the next steps we take? Albert's given a great example of these tables. What else? What's happening in the brain, and how do we make progress?
Yeah, that's really good. Oh man, Pastor Albert, whew, you're something else. We got to hang out when I go back to California.
He is something else.
So a couple of things, Mindy. First thing is you have to recognize there's a difference between churches that have started out, and most of these churches are more recent, who started out with a vision for multi-ethnicity and talking about these issues. There's a difference between leading that church and leading a church that's been in existence for 50 plus years.
Right.
Okay? I mean, and that just needs to be said, the way you approach this. The church I was at, it was in existence for 60 years before I got there. And I was the first Black senior pastor they ever had, okay? One thing that I had to practice was having a longer view, things, right? An individual can turn a corner much faster than an organization can, all right? And we live in this microwave culture, right? We expect everything to be done and finished in 5 minutes, okay? So having this longer view of things, and I would say one thing this pastor can do in the Midwest, the rural Midwest, is look up, you can Google racial identity development, okay? Huh. There are a lot of research tested models of racial identity development for white people, for Black people, for Asians, just for biracial people, okay? So look up these models so you can see these stages. And I'd say they're predictable stages that people go through in their own ethnic identity and in their ethnic understanding. Just a couple more things is this. Do not deputize one person in your church, all right, to carry this torch, right? I've seen this way too often, all right? They'll just choose one person, and if it's a majority culture church, they'll choose the ethnic minority person and have them have the discussions. This needs to be a whole church effort, a team effort. And Pastor Albert, I just love, what you all are doing. I'm actually doing research right now, a pretty big research study on actually faculty members who are engaging in these conversations in graduate school. And you would think that should be easy. It is not. So if it's not easy in grad school, right, in psychology and counseling, we know it's much harder in the church. But one thing these people are saying, and we're studying actually faculty of color who are leading these conversations in predominantly white environments, but I say white pastors can do the same thing, is they're learning to use research, have book discussions, find ways where their voice isn't always at the center, okay? So people can argue with the book, and they're not always arguing with you,
That's
Right?
awesome.
And there are a lot of different resources out there. I think about Be the Bridge. I forget
Latasha Morrison.
Tasha Morrison, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they have a curriculum to help your church walk through this. Now, I say all this to say, engage around this material, right? That they're working on, and that will calm that hippocampus in the back of your brain, that fire alarm system, right? That for a lot of us is way too sensitive. That fight, flight, or freeze system, right? And just we always come back to soul care, right? We come back to soul care. You have to realize if you're a pastor of a multi-ethnic church, you are on the front lines of what God is doing in the kingdom here in the U.S. Okay, and these rhythms, we talk about these rhythms of Sabbath and engaging with community. That's going to be especially important for you.
And I think, and I want to be fair, and I don't want to be, but I think let's just have if we're going to be real, let's just keep it real. For minorities that are leading in multi-ethnic spaces, one of the greatest things that will bring peace to our soul is in a more abundance of woke whites who aren't perpetually creating cultures of whiteness and expecting us to acclimate to them. That'll help us sleep really well at night.
That's beautiful.
Save us some money with therapy. Come on, can we just keep it real?
Yeah.
Like if we didn't have to be so defensive of our tears and have to explain why we matter and have to argue and fight and assimilate for a seat at the table and fight for our own identity and resist the temptation of tokenism to secure the bag while we surrender our voice. Did you understand what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
I want to get this check, but I'm scared to use my voice because if I say Black Lives Matter, you're going to get a call from your top donor and that's going to affect me. So like that creates torture on the soul. Go ahead, Mindy.
It's exhausting. And so the challenge and is an absolute fair one for this context and what we're trying to do here is to say majority culture, let's look to the right and left at that table, the blood-soaked table of the kingdom, and see who's next to us and get to know them, get to understand, maybe do it through research. So our hypothalamus, is that what that's called? Doesn't get triggered with our own fight and flight and freeze and fear and all that. But for heaven's sakes, we're sitting in a place of privilege already. We're not at risk. Sadly, we should be. We're not.
Yeah.
Right? We just need to say, let's listen, let's love, let's empathize, let's walk in one another's shoes. And I know for our church, which we are predominantly, Boulder County, Colorado, pretty much of a white church. But we do have two pastors who are helping us lead this charge. We have a lot of great and significant voices, but we started doing a reading club around these issues and created like a parking lot Sunday night gathering with facilitated, bring your own lawn chairs, stay 6 feet apart, no more than 10 people in a group. And we all had to watch one of the movies. That's a really great informational, like, as a majority culture person who considers herself fairly well educated, very unaware of almost everything I watched in that movie. Yeah. And I show up perhaps less, I don't know that I would have been triggered, but to your point, Eric, this is like, now I have objective truth that I can contend with that isn't loaded with any threatening edges. It's just, hey, this is, I think we watched 13th. I think that was the movie that everybody had to watch. And we had some well-structured questions that went from, how much of this did you know? How did you react to this? What does this make you think about our world? And then how do we move into this more meaningfully? So I take that challenge to heart, Albert, and I hope everyone who's listening can hear that very authentic desire. Like, I wouldn't be needing to spend so much time in therapy or figure out how to answer these impossible email situations I find myself in if the majority culture, especially the Christians within that majority culture, weren't in any way sort of activating some of the most painful conversations that are going on. So I hear that.
So complicit in the trauma of the Black life. Like, so complicit in the trauma of the Black life. And you know me, Mindy, I've worked in white circles. So when I think about the opportunity that I have to speak to my white siblings who are leaders of organizations,
Yep.
It's an honor and a privilege because I love this work. I've been committed to racial reconciliation in this work of trying to bring us all to this table for over 15 years.
Yeah.
So I'm deeply invested in it. So I want to try to say hard things in love to push us to this place, because here's the deal. So here's the admonishment, even with that, to my white siblings: don't make your education
Your
our
job.
burden. You see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? As Black leaders, because
Totally.
what happens is you go to your nearest Black associate, employee, friend, cousin, and whatever, and say, yo, what you really say is, would you teach me all the stuff that I don't know about Black people that I'm starting to see? And especially for staff members who are your employees, it creates this dynamic and this burden that you will never know, never understand, or appreciate. So take it from me and people like Dr. Eric when we tell you and believe us, that's not a good posture to put them in. You'll never understand really until you get outside of it, the creation. So if your advisor on how to show up multi-ethnically and to be conscious on this subject is your employee, I can guarantee you almost 100% they ain't telling you the full truth.
Please.
Because to tell you the full, go ahead on, I'm just gonna tag you in, Dr. Eric, go ahead.
Please do not put them in that position. What I continue to tell people, if you're a pastor, you need to have people who are telling you the truth, who are not under your leadership, certainly not under your employment. You're putting them in an impossible position, right? And Pastor Albert, I love what you're saying here, because you're talking about these things that chip away at the resilience, okay, of leaders of color, right, and other people of color. You know, I'm thinking about in counseling, and I do marriage counseling. One thing we talk about in one particular theory is catching the bullet. So as a therapist, there are times when I'm working with a couple, right, and this one person, I mean, I know they're going to go right in and they're going to say something that's going to be really wounding. I need to catch that bullet. I need to catch this conversation. And that's something that actually a lot of white leaders could help with.
That's
all right?
awesome.
Catch the bullet. You know who your members are, okay, who are really angry, okay, about what's going on. You need to catch that bullet to protect some of your leaders of color and your other members.
Yeah.
Dr. Eric, oh, that's such a big deal. You wouldn't believe the amount of minorities that are working at these white churches that have the desire to have multi-ethnic. So they got a killer Black worship leader, or they got a teaching pastor or something, and they're trying to succeed, but they're getting all of their advice as a white leader on how to navigate it from those Black folks in the church. So when issues like this happen, they come, and my call list is there, and I'm talking about, we can name some of the biggest churches, influential, some of the ones. The Black leaders in these white institutions are suffering. They are suffering because they feel the burden and they cannot tell the full truth to these leaders. And then they have leaders that won't absorb the bullet. Why? Listen to this. They will get emails, and they will bring those emails to those Black leaders and say, they saw this post that you made, and I need you to now take this down, or I need you to edit your words, or I don't need you to say Black Lives Matter because of the implications of the organization, not the statement, but because of what the statement represents, because of the organization. Because we can't see that in two distinct ways, or at least we say we can't. And to that, I say, well, what about when you say "Make America Great Again"? Now that statement is that statement, but it's tied to ideology and some practices that aren't necessarily that Christian and that biblical. But you know how to take a statement, but not tie that to every moral fiber of the people who it represent.
That's a good example.
Come on now, do you see what I'm doing? Oh, we
Come
got
on, Albert.
now.
Come on.
But my thing is, these Black leaders are starting to do that. So here's the last one, and then I'll jump back off this soapbox. White leaders to serve their minority siblings well, listen, find mentors who don't work for you, who don't need anything from you, and say, listen. And to be a mentor, you don't even have to have a meeting with them. We live in a time now where I can be mentored by somebody and never meet them because I'm a student of them. Listen, because here's the thing, here's what's so telling. If until we make racial reconciliation a vision for spiritual formation, we miss the fullness of what God is trying to do. But we don't see it as spiritual formation. We see it as an extracurricular class that we jump into, that we take an optional. Or watch this, we treat it, we react to culture concerning race. So that the only sermon you preach concerning race is when you're reacting to culture. We've got to move it from a reaction to culture to a response of the working out of the gospel, a response from the gospel. Yeah. That's why, check this out. Here's the evidence. That's why you got white leaders now talking about race, but they're talking at a third grade level. Last week, they were talking about soteriology and the Trinity, and they sounded like PhDs. You put the microphone in their face and say, well, what about race? And they sound like second graders because we have not developed a theological vision concerning race.
And I'm having a season in my own life coming up to mind that I want to kind of process out with you guys, and see if this might suggest a way forward that might be helpful for some of the majority culture leaders that are, we hope, still listening and learning from us. I had the opportunity to consult with a pretty large African-American church on the south side of Chicago for a season. And I would drive from my suburb down to the south side of Chicago 3 days a week. And I was the minority in those conversations. I was learning quickly the culture, what the norms were, all kinds of wonderful, wonderful gifts, and received many good long-term relationships through that. And learned a lot. But there was one day I was sitting at the table with several of the leaders who were all working on spiritual formation and soul care and small group strategies, and what does that look like in the context of the South Side of Chicago. So just really good questions. And someone anecdotally brought up the fact that their daughter was pursuing her PhD program at Georgetown on how Uncle Tom's Cabin was significant to the Civil War. And I sat there at that table, the only white person, which was fine and appropriate, but I sat there and thought, I have an Ivy League education. I have been in Christian ministry my whole life, and I know what Uncle Tom's Cabin is, but I had never actually read the book. And I was on the verge of tears in the meeting. I was so ashamed that PhD level work was being done on something that I considered probably a classic, probably important. Like, I stopped at Barnes and Noble on the way home and bought the paperback version of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And the reason I tell you that story, and it took me on a journey where I ended up in South Africa and walking across from where Robben Island was, and wrecked on this topic on so many levels. This was back in 2005, so long ago. But I was wrecked at the level of ignorance that I had. But the reason I bring it up is it started not from some political issue going on in our country that I needed to react to quickly and try to go from a kindergarten level education to second grade education. And then I can't make up a lifetime of learning in like 3 weeks because the news cycle is warranting that. And I wonder if there's people on our call who, from the sake of curiosity and just wanting to learn, might be on our own journey of discovery without the weight of having to make it about what the message is going to be on Sunday and how am I showing up in social media. I feel like the pressure to be so highly exposed on all these things doesn't create the sort of safe space that I think many of us might benefit from, to go on, like, find a mentor, somebody far away, somebody that, you know, maybe we can help you connect with. I don't know, but like, reach your hand out to someone that we can maybe help with, or just shake your own relational network tree and see who out there could help you in a safe place to start processing and understanding and integrating your sense of reality with the broader truth of our shared history.
See,
And
Mindy,
what
I think the beautiful thing about that is proximity breeds empathy. You were in the
totally,
room and
totally,
that created a sense of empathy. Here's the problem though. If the burden, to use your language when we first gathered together, if the burden is driven by the front of the stage and not the back of the stage, you will miss a genuine opportunity to be transformed.
amen. That's what I'm trying to get to is, guys, how does this become a backstage topic? Everybody's dealing with it on the front stage right now. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter that there are front stage ways to be relevant right now, but the backstage is the genesis of everything. It's you and God and history and truth and reality and contending and questioning and curious, and it's a different space that allows you to stand very differently on the front stage when the right time comes. And I fear for us, if we're just all obsessed even right now on this topic with what's happening on the front stage, and don't do the backstage soul interior work development to get us to a place where we are standing with integrity with what we truly believe and observe and have seen and can speak to in a more intelligent way, not just because we feel the pressure of Facebook, or Instagram or whatever. And it's like, guys, the long-term view, Eric, that you're talking about, I think that's vital for us. We've got to keep that long-term view. Do you care about the blood-stained table that we all sit at? I bet everyone who's listening on this call does. I bet everyone does. So then how do we move forward with that in a more deliberate way? I mean, I'm like now on my little soapbox here, but Eric, any other thoughts as a clinician, like as you think about who comes into your office and what the struggles are when they're honest about what's going on in the backstage? Any other words you would suggest or practices that help us move in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate something that we've talked about before. Create the conversations with your leadership. Okay, there are so many resources now. All right, in the past 6 to 8 weeks, you Google this, they have so many lists of documentaries you can watch, books you can read. Okay, and create that conversation with the leadership team first. Okay, and then move it throughout your congregation. I love what you're doing, Albert, out there in California. I think that's beautiful, having all of these conversations.
I would say, Mindy, what you said is so moving, but I think it synthesizes a really, really big point um, that I think we got to wrestle with and we got to be honest and contend with. Couple of things. Number one, TD Jakes says it this way: a white person can get a PhD and never have to study Black culture, but a Black person can't get a GED without having to know fully how to navigate white culture. So that's a reality. I think your story captures the very essence of that. And moved by your response to what you saw and immediately said, I need to become a student, and begin to learn, and how that puts you on a journey. I think that's beautiful. I think it's a front stage issue. And I think Dr. Eric would agree. Um, and it's what brings I mean, to be honest, Mindy, I think we'll do you a disservice if we don't make this a part of the conversation. This is what I'm going to invite you into, a space that many Christian minorities live in, that navigate white institutions and white Christian spaces. There is a sense of cynicism, skepticism, um, and just a fear of we've been disappointed by our white evangelical siblings so many times on this issue. So many times. And if this ever became a backstage issue for our white siblings, America would change within 24 hours. I mean, let's just be honest. If this was a backstage issue for the white leaders during the civil rights movement, if white leaders led the civil rights movement, the march would have taken 10 minutes.
Yep.
It would have been over. If white leaders step up and lead this conversation against police brutality, underfunding of education, and what's happening in our communities and in our neighborhoods, the movement will last 20. We wouldn't even have time to make t-shirts because it would be over, because it became a backstage issue to white leaders. So this is why the multi-ethnic church is so important, because we all got to be freed from the normalized whiteness. And white people live out. So when I say whiteness, I don't mean white people. I mean,
I know what you mean.
A system, a construct for our listeners that may not understand that, for a system and a construct that normalizes whiteness as the standard that we all fall short of. So we all need to be freed from it, both the oppressor and the oppressed.
Right.
Because if the oppressed just get free, but the oppressors aren't, then I'm sorry, tomorrow's still going to be a day of bondage.
It's going to be the same. Yeah. And I would say for me that I'm telling you that episode as one piece of my own journey. And, there have been many since.
Of course.
I hope I didn't sound that.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Reading one book was somehow changing the trajectory for me.
Can I ask Pastor Albert one question? Do you actually have to prepare for your sermons, or can you just get up and talk? Because I used to have to make your mind. I'm listening to you, and I'm like, "Ooh, he's good." I mean, okay.
I wish I could manuscript. I cannot manuscript to save my life. So you are a good doctor. You just read me like a book. I wish I go up with an outline, 3 words, and a story, and we just see what the Lord does from there.
It's a good gift. So I, as the representative of the white majority culture on this call, I do want to say, and I hope I'm speaking for others, and maybe we can issue a challenge here, guys. Make this a backstage issue. Maybe stop thinking about what you're going to put on Instagram or what you're going to preach on. And I'm not minimizing the importance of those platforms. They are important, but maybe there's space for you and God to go and spend a day. And maybe you go to a very different place of your city to spend that day and just drive around, look around, go somewhere, learn, listen, say, God, speak, your servant is listening. Because I really do agree, this could be done in a very short period of time if the majority leaders had the right mindset, were moving forward in meaningful ways to bring reconciliation and justice. And I'm not suggesting this is simple or simplistic. I'm not an expert on any of these things. But I do know that when you create the right quiet space, the Holy Spirit speaks. And maybe amidst all the other noises we've been listening to, maybe that one voice is the one that you can hear from most urgently. And only from that voice, in my view, will you have the courage to move forward, because that's going to be what's needed. And again, you're operating from a place of strength. Many of I'm going to assume listeners are male, white majority culture, which is a different place of strength than what white women can stand into. And this is a really vital kingdom moment. And we at Resilient Church Leadership stand ready to walk with you in this. We believe this is vitally important. And and we want to be a resource. Figure out how to connect you with other people, connect you with resources, etc. I see a great question has come in on a book. It's a best book in regards to racial reconciliation, and I don't really have, I haven't done the level of reading that my sons and others have. But I would say if you've never read Uncle Tom's Cabin, start there and figure out how to embrace an understanding of what is real. That's not so highly politicized in our moment. Start with what's real, do some research. It's not beyond you, and listen to the Spirit, because there may be some things in the backstage of your life that are going to start to move you front stage, and we need that. Our world needs it. So anyway,
couple of
those are some of my thoughts.
recommendations. Yeah, Tony Evans. I think it's Oneness Embrace, but he wrote a book on race. Dr. John Perkins, One Blood. Latasha Morrison, Be the Bridge, wrote a book there. And there's several others, but those are good. I know they speak about the church. They speak about racial reconciliation.
Excellent.
I believe one is Brenda Salter McNeil, Road to Reconciliation. That was that one. One that's really good and very disruptive to talk about this concept of whiteness that I've been talking about. White Fragility is a great book that kind of helps us to see the dynamics that we swim in that we may not see that are at play. So White Fragility is another really good one.
Great.
I would just throw in Jamar Tisby's The Color of Compromise.
Yes.
Really good one. The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. Have all of your leadership read and discuss that.
Yeah, we did a full day on this at my company at Glue, and brought forward some of those authors and speakers into a environment to start some conversations among coworkers around this, and it's been incredibly helpful. Guys, I think we could keep talking about this for a long time, but I'd love to give you each an opportunity to say sort of a final challenge, a final word, and please undo anything that I said that was not right. Eric, we'll start with you.
I'll start out. I just want to echo something that Pastor Albert said before. Your goal in your churches are to create brave spaces, not safe spaces.
Amen.
I'll say it again. Church leadership, you need to create brave spaces, not safe spaces.
That's good. That's good. I would say fall in love with this vision that we see of God's church being every tribe, every nation, every race. And as you fall in love for that vision, fall in courage to fight for it. And see this as spiritual maturity, as a spiritual formation, as discipleship, and not extracurricularship.
Agreed.
I know that ain't a word, but I learned in seminary, if I say it with confidence,
then it's a word.
Then it's a word.
It is a word.
And I would think that's the final word. It's the burden, it's the issue of our day. And if this becomes a backstage issue and a burden, a biblical kingdom burden for all leaders, the fight will only last for another day. We will overcome quicker than you could ever imagine. May the oppressors and the oppressed be free by the sake of the gospel and that bloodstained table.
Brothers, thank you for your candor and willingness to jump in on this topic, and may that day come soon.
Amen.
Friends, thanks for joining us at this weekly webcast on the Backstage at resilientchurchleadership.com. You will find all of the references to every single resource that we've mentioned. The movies, the books, all the different resources will be available to you there, and we highly recommend you go there, begin a journey, and we have a mailing list. You can register for that so you know about these webcasts every week. But if there's a way to raise your hand and let us know if there's any other way we can be supportive to your journey,